All Saints Day rolls around but once a year, and once a year I use this passage. The message comes from the book of Hebrews, chapter 11. We don't know who wrote the book of Hebrews. Some say Paul, some say Apollos, some say Silas. But we know he's true. He says, now faith is the substance of things hoped for. It's the evidence of things we can't see. And it talks about the heroes of the faith. The heroes that had come before lived their life out in faith and died in faith. And he goes on to list them. By faith, Abel offered God a more excellent sacrifice. By faith, Enoch did not die, but he was translated. By faith, Noah built an ark. By faith, Abraham obeyed God and moved from his home to the promised land. By faith, Sarah believed God's promise that she would bear a son even in her old age. By faith, Moses stood up to Pharaoh and led the Israelites out of captivity in Egypt to the land promised to Abraham 500 years before. The writer goes on and talks about by faith, Joshua and Gideon and Barak and Samson and Esther and David, by faith, they lived their life out. Whether it was a short life or a long one, they lived every day of their life by faith. The next chapter, Hebrews 12 and 1, the writer goes on. After he lists all these heroes of the faith, all of these names that are known to history of being towers of faith in Scripture. Some of them died as martyrs. Some of them died of old age. Moses, God took him on the mountain. We don't know how he died. But the writer of Hebrews says, therefore now, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us, and let us run with endurance the race set before us. Looking to Jesus, the author and the finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despised the shame, and is now set down at the right hand of God the Father in heaven. Right now here today in this church, we are surrounded by a cloud of witnesses. I could name dozens of them to you. You know many of them. Vicki Harold, Gerald Smalley, Rick Bogenwright, Carolyn Tucker, Chris Cook. Cloud of witnesses to each one of us. People that lived their life out. They not only talked about their faith, they lived it. You would know they were a believer just by watching. Heroes of the faith, the cloud of witnesses. We have a perspective of 2,000 more years, and countless others have been added to that cloud of witnesses. This cloud of people that have overcome great obstacles. They've achieved great victories. Many were persecuted, suffered, and died for the faith. After Christ, countless more died for defending the faith as they testified to their faith even in their death. Stephen was stoned. James was run through with a spear. Peter was crucified upside down. Paul was beheaded. All for the faith. They not only lived in faith, they died in the faith. They lived their faith every day. It was not just a 1 hour on Sunday faith. It was a lived faith, and it was a living faith. And the Apostle Jude writes in verse 3, let us now, he puts it in the present tense, let us now contend for the faith. It's our turn now. Contend, to fight for, to push forward, to advance. Let us contend for the faith as these heroes did. You know, we all have people in our lives that are now part of that great cloud of witnesses. Someone who molded and shaped and impacted our faith. And I don't think there's a one of us here today that is not here today because of at least one person in your life, who either introduced you to church or introduced you to Jesus Christ. And I told the first service, there's many people in my life, but the first one was an old deacon. He was old. He's probably 50. It's close to home now, don't it? Tom Rubeck, Plainfield, First Baptist Church, Plainfield, Indiana. 6 years old. I remember after church sitting down in the front pew with old Deacon Tom. I didn't know a lot of theology, but he told me, you know, I've done bad things. disappointed mom and dad. Same with God. And those things where we disappoint God, we call sin. And he walked me through a level of understanding that I could grasp at 6 years of age, and I accepted Christ that morning, sitting on that front pew. I was baptized a few weeks later. I didn't understand everything, but I understood enough that I wanted to be a follower of Jesus. Each of us can point to someone, a co-worker, a close friend, maybe a relative, a mother, father, a grandmother, grandfather, maybe a spouse or a pastor whose life and faith walk had a profound impact on your own. Few of us would be people of faith today without that special person somewhere in our life. Maybe 6 months ago, maybe 60 years ago. That person that testified with their living of the power of faith over death. I think of my own Grandma Troke and my Grandma Renner. I remember my Grandma Renner walking by her room, and she was on her knees praying for each one of her grandkids. And she had about 30 of them. Prayed for them by name. She didn't have to tell me what she believed. I saw it in the way she lived. My Uncle John was a preacher. My Uncle George was a farmer, towering man of faith. Lived by example. And my own mom and dad. Paul, at the end of his life, is in prison in Rome. And he had left his young disciple Timothy in Ephesus, a church that Paul started many years before, to run the church at Ephesus. And over the next few years, Paul wrote Timothy, we don't know how many letters, but we have two of them, 1 Timothy and 2 Timothy. You see, Paul spent his life contending for the faith. Everything he did was to advance the cause of Christ. He contended for the faith. He was not just content with his faith. He was jailed. He was beaten. He was beaten with rods, beaten with whips. He was shipwrecked. And now he's in prison. He knows that in the next few days, under the Emperor Nero, they're going to take him outside the walls of Rome and behead him, because he would not recant his faith in Jesus Christ. So he writes to Timothy, my life is already being poured out as a sacrifice. My time is at hand. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. A few days later, Paul joined Stephen and James and all those Old Testament heroes of the faith outside the walls of Rome. He reminds us to run with endurance the race that is set before us. Paul and the writer of Hebrews continually refer to a life of faith as a race. It's a metaphor. They use that term, a race being a life of faith, that you don't quit till you get to the finish line. Hebrews, the writer says, since we are so surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, then, present tense, let us also run with endurance the race that is set before us. It's a common metaphor. Paul used it frequently. Others did too. You know, there's many types of races. There's sprints and marathons. But the race they're talking about in Scripture is not a sprint. It's not a marathon. It's a relay race. Each one of us who believe will eventually become part of the cloud of witnesses. We will be a leg of that relay until it's our time to leave. We have accepted the torch from those who came before. And we will pass the torch on to those who follow. The question is, how faithfully will we run our life? How faithfully will we run our leg of the race? Will we drop the torch? Will we tire and slow down before the handoff? Or will we run with endurance? Even without using words, will our life stand as a testimony to anybody that looks at it? Yogi Berra said, it ain't over till it's over. This old candle here used to be about that tall. Some of you know the story. Every Sunday morning I would light that candle. Every funeral service, every wedding, any event that happened here in the sanctuary of any significance, we lit that candle. And I don't know how long it stood on the altar. A couple of years anyway, maybe more. And little by little it burnt down. I had to take a knife and trim it a couple times just so you could see the flame. And then we got this better candle. It has lighter fluid in it, kerosene. It works great. But what do we do with the old candle? What do I do with that? It seems sacrilegious to throw it away. It sat on the altar of God for how many years? Do you know how many services? And I was in a conversation with Sherry Smalley. She was in the first service. And I expressed to her, what do you do with an old candle that has served the Lord? She said, well, that old candle might be dipped over, wore out, and mostly used up, but there's still life in that old candle. It ain't over till it's over. That's my question for you this week. What will your legacy be? When people look at your life, when the preacher has spoken kind words over you at your funeral, after your candle has been lit, and your candle will be lit someday, what will people remember about you? The fancy, beautiful house that you have, your cool car collection, your money, your fame, your power, your wealth, your prestige. You were a great fisherman or a great golfer. What will people remember about you that is of lasting, eternal value? That's your legacy. We all accomplish some of those things in our life, but when we die, they die too. It's the old saying, you never see a hearse pulling a new walker. What is your legacy? What will people remember when you join the cloud of witnesses? Will your time on earth have an impact on eternity? Will there be someone, somewhere, someday, who will look back on their life and say, I know Jesus today because of you?